You clicked because you've seen it happen. A crack in the concrete step, a patch that lets go after one winter. You mix the bag, you follow the directions, and 2 years later, it's crumbling again. Here's what I learned, and it stopped me cold. The strongest concrete ever made wasn't invented in a lab last year. It was poured almost 2,000 years ago, and it's still standing today, while the driveway I paid good money for cracked in under a decade. That knowledge didn't vanish by accident. It was common, it was written down, and then it was quietly set aside because a cheaper, faster product made somebody rich. Before the end, I'll show you what a team at a major American institute confirmed in January of 2023, hidden inside a 2,000-year-old wall. And I promise you this works with materials you can get near your own home. No special training, no factory. I remember standing at the edge of my own back patio, watching a hairline crack spread after the frost, thinking, I just fixed this. That was the moment I started asking why the old stuff outlasts the new. So let me take you back, because this story is older and stranger than most people ever hear. There's a building in Rome called the Pantheon. It has a dome made of unreinforced concrete, no steel bars inside it at all. That dome was finished around 126 of the Common Era. It is still, to this day, the largest unreinforced concrete dome on the entire planet. Nearly 19 centuries of rain, earthquakes, heat, and cold, and it has not fallen. Now think about that. The concrete sidewalk in front of a modern building often needs replacing in 20 to 30 years. Some highway concrete starts failing in 50. But a Roman dome with nothing holding it together but the recipe itself has stood for almost 2,000 years. That's not luck. That's a formula we forgot. I used to think old meant primitive. I believed the marketing, that every year the bag on the shelf got smarter. But the more I dug, the more I realized we didn't move forward. In one important way, we moved backward, and we did it on purpose because backward was cheaper to sell. Here's the first piece that shocked me. The Romans wrote their recipe down. A man named Vitruvius, an engineer and architect, put it in a book called On Architecture around 15 years before the Common Era began. He described exactly what to mix. He wasn't guessing. He was recording standard practice that builders already used every day. And the key ingredient wasn't some rare magic. It was volcanic ash. They gathered it from the ground near a town called Pozzuoli, close to Naples, and the material got its name from that town. They called it pozzolana. They mixed that ash with lime and water and rubble, and they built harbors, aqueducts, bathhouses, and that impossible dome. But here's where it gets interesting, and here's the tension I couldn't shake. If the recipe was written down almost 2,000 years ago, in a book people could read, why did we stop using it? Why did we trade a formula that lasts 2,000 years for one that lasts 30? To answer that, I had to follow the money, and the trail leads to a single patent. The concrete in your driveway, the concrete under most of the modern world, comes from something called Portland cement. A bricklayer in England named Joseph Aspdin took out the patent for it in 1824. He called it Portland cement because the hardened color looked like a fashionable building stone from the Isle of Portland. It was a clever product and a clever name. And I want to be fair here. Portland cement is not evil. It's fast. It's strong quickly. You can pour it today and drive on it soon. For a world in a hurry, building railways and cities and factories, speed was everything. So it spread across the globe in a few short decades and pushed the old lime and ash methods into the corner. But fast and cheap came with a hidden bill, and you and I have been paying that bill our whole lives without knowing it. Here's the thing nobody put on the bag. Portland cement is rigid and brittle. It sets hard and unforgiving. When the ground shifts, when water freezes and expands, when the seasons push and pull, that rigid material has no give, so it cracks. And once it cracks, water gets in, and the cracking gets worse every single year until you're back at the store buying another bag. The old Roman material behaved differently. It was more forgiving, and, as you'll see in a moment, it could actually heal itself. But that story got buried under 150 years of a faster product, and by the time our grandparents were grown, most people had never even heard the word pozzolana, so we lost it, or we thought we did. But the recipe was never truly gone, because it was hiding in plain sight, holding up buildings we walk past every day, waiting for someone to ask the right question. And when scientists finally asked it, what they found turned everything I believed upside down. For a long time, even the experts had a simple explanation. They said Roman concrete lasted because of that volcanic ash reacting with seawater over centuries, slowly growing tough minerals inside the material. That was the accepted answer for years. It was a good answer, but it was incomplete, and the missing piece is the part that matters most for you and me. Because there was always a strange detail nobody could explain. When researchers looked closely at ancient Roman concrete, they kept finding little white chunks scattered all through it, small, bright lumps, sometimes the size of a grain of rice. For decades, scientists assumed these were mistakes, sloppy mixing, poor quality control, cheap workmanship by careless crews. Think about that arrogance for a second. We looked at a material that outlasted every empire since, and we assumed the builders were sloppy. We assumed we were smarter. I did the same thing with the old methods in my own home for years, and it cost me. Then came the study I promised you at the start. In January of 2023, a research team led by a scientist named Admir Masick, working at a major American Institute of Technology, published their findings. They had gone back and studied those little white lumps that everyone had dismissed. And what they discovered rewrote the whole story. Those white chunks weren't mistakes. They were the secret. The Romans, it turned out, weren't just mixing lime the gentle way everyone assumed. They were using a technique the researchers called hot mixing. Instead of only using slaked lime, the calmed-down, watered-down kind, they mixed in quicklime, the raw, reactive kind, directly with the other ingredients. When that quicklime met water, it created intense heat. And that heat, combined with the fast mixing, left behind those little lime-rich lumps scattered all through the concrete. Here's why that changes everything. Those lumps are like tiny first aid kits built right into the wall. When a crack forms and water seeps in, the water reaches one of those lime lumps, dissolves it, and the dissolved lime flows into the crack. There it hardens again and seals the gap shut. The concrete literally heals its own wounds. The very thing we called a defect was a self-repair system engineered on purpose 2,000 years ago. Let that sink in. The material we buy today cracks and stays cracked and gets worse. The material they made before the fall of Rome could patch itself while nobody was even looking. We didn't just lose a recipe. We lost a living, self-healing material and replaced it with a brittle one, and we called that progress. And the researchers proved it. They made concrete both ways, the old hot mixed way with those lime lumps and the modern way without them. Then they deliberately cracked both samples and ran water through the cracks. The modern sample leaked forever. The Roman-style sample sealed its own crack in a matter of weeks, and the water stopped flowing through it entirely. So now I had to ask the harder question. If a research team could recreate this, if the recipe is written in a 2,000-year-old book, then why is nobody selling it to us? Why is the self-healing option not on the shelf next to the brittle one? And the answer to that is where this stops being ancient history and starts being about your wallet. Because there's a reason a product that lasts 30 years is more profitable than a product that lasts 2,000. A material that heals itself and stands for centuries only sells once. A material that cracks every few winters sells again and again and again for the rest of your life. I'm not saying anyone sat in a room and plotted against you. I'm saying the incentive was always pointed at the thing that keeps you coming back to the register. and that incentive shaped everything. It shaped what got taught, what got sold, and what quietly got left out of the story. The forgetting wasn't a conspiracy in a dark room. It was simpler and colder than that. The durable knowledge just wasn't worth marketing, so it faded, generation by generation, until people like you and me never heard it at all. But here's what they couldn't erase, because it was carved into the buildings themselves. Everywhere the Romans used their pozzolana concrete for harbors, structures sitting in seawater for 2,000 years, those structures didn't just survive the seawater, they got stronger from it. The salt water that eats modern concrete alive actually fed a chemical reaction that grew new binding minerals inside the Roman material over the centuries. The ocean, the great destroyer of everything we build, was making their concrete tougher the whole time. An old writer named Pliny the Elder noticed this with his own eyes almost 2,000 years ago. He wrote that these sea structures became a single stone mass, unconquerable by the waves, and stronger every day. He was watching it happen in his own lifetime, and he wrote it down, and we simply stopped reading it. So the knowledge survived in stone and in books. The question that kept me up was whether an ordinary person in an ordinary home could actually use any of this. Because it's one thing to admire a Roman dome, it's another to fix your own crumbling step. And that's exactly where I want to turn now. Now, I know what some of you are thinking right now. You're thinking this is fine for someone building a brand new house, or someone with money to spend on fancy materials, but not for you. You've got the home you've already got. You're not pouring a new foundation. You just want the cracks to stop coming back without spending a fortune. This next part is for you specifically, so stay with me because this is the part that changed how I take care of my own place. And that cost is exactly why I sat down and wrote out everything I'd recovered, because a video can hold a story, but it can't hold every measurement, every mix ratio, every curing schedule for the dust on your garage floor, the damp corner of your basement, the flaking plaster in your hallway. So I put it all into 3 books of my own, the lime and cement and mortar formulas mixed from what's already in your kitchen or your garage, the bonding coat nobody at the hardware counter mentions, the curing discipline everyone skips, the seasonal timing that decides whether your patch survives the first hard freeze, plus before and after cases and printable cards you can carry out to the wall with you. It's for the man who already paid for patch that peeled and sealer that failed, and it tells you exactly why each one failed, so you never need a contractor's quote for that wall again. If you want the whole system in your hands, scan the QR code right there on your screen, link in the description, pinned comment, and the collection is yours. Now, back to those little white lumps, because the story of who finally figured them out is the part that still gives me chills. The single most useful thing I recovered from all of this isn't Roman concrete at all. It's the material the Romans built their whole system on, the material our own great-grandparents used before Portland cement took over. It's lime. Plain, old-fashioned lime mortar and lime plaster and lime wash. And it's still available, still cheap, and almost nobody under 70 remembers why it matters. Here's the difference that stunned me. Modern Portland cement mortar is hard and sealed tight, like a plastic bag around your wall. When moisture gets into an old brick or stone wall, and it always does, that moisture has nowhere to go, so it stays trapped and it rots the brick and the wall from the inside. Lime mortar is the opposite. Lime is breathable. It lets moisture pass through and evaporate away. The wall can breathe, so it stays dry inside and lasts far longer. That's why so many old brick homes, the ones built before the 1920s, start crumbling right after someone repoints them with modern cement. The homeowner thinks they're helping. They're using the strong modern stuff, but they've just wrapped a breathing wall in plastic. And now the soft old brick has to fight the trapped water alone, and the brick loses. I watched a neighbor do exactly this to a beautiful old chimney, and within a few winters the brick faces were flaking off in sheets. The mortar he used was harder than the brick, so the brick took all the damage. That's the rule the old-timers knew and we forgot. Your mortar should always be softer than your brick or stone. The mortar is meant to be the sacrificial part, the cheap part that wears and can be replaced. Lime mortar does that job. It gives a little. It flexes with the seasons instead of fighting them. And here's the part that ties it back to Rome. Lime mortar can heal its own tiny cracks too, in the very same way, because free lime inside it dissolves in rainwater and reseals small gaps over time. So if you have an older brick home, a stone foundation, a brick planter, a garden wall, an old chimney, here is what you do, and it costs almost nothing. When you repoint, when you fill the joints between the bricks, you use a lime-based mortar, not a straight Portland cement mix. You can buy bagged natural hydraulic lime, or you can buy lime putty. You mix it with clean sand, usually about 1 part lime to 3 parts sand, and water, until it's like a stiff paste. You rake out the old crumbling mortar first, wet the joint, press the lime mortar in, and let it cure slowly, keeping it damp for a few days so it doesn't dry too fast. That slow curing is the secret people miss. Lime doesn't set by drying, it sets by slowly pulling in carbon dioxide from the air and turning back into stone, the same stone it came from. It's literally becoming rock again, right there in your wall. The same chemistry the Romans relied on. It takes patience. But patience is free, and a wall that lasts 100 years instead of 20 is the best trade I know. And there's one more thing you can do this week with lime that costs almost nothing, and it protects everything I just talked about. It's called lime wash. It's just lime and water, sometimes with a natural pigment for color, brushed onto brick, stone, or plaster like a thin paint. Our ancestors coated their homes, their barns, and their cellars with it for centuries, and they weren't just decorating. Lime wash breathes like the mortar does, so it protects the surface without sealing it. And lime is naturally hostile to mold and mildew and many germs, which is exactly why dairy barns and root cellars were whitewashed with it, to keep them clean and sweet-smelling before we had a single chemical spray. I lime washed the inside of my own cellar wall, the damp corner that always grew a little mildew every spring. One coat, then a second the next day. That corner has stayed clean since, and it cost me the price of a small bag of lime. No fancy equipment, no specialist. Just a brush, a bucket, and knowledge that used to be as common as knowing how to bake bread. But I told you at the start I found something buried inside a 2,000-year-old wall, confirmed in 2023, that you could actually use yourself. And I don't want to leave that promise unpaid. Because the researchers didn't just explain why the old concrete worked. They handed us back the exact technique. And once you understand it, you can build a small piece of self-healing, Roman-style material in your own backyard this weekend. Here is the recovered recipe, the real one, the hot mix method, those white lumps finally revealed. The old assumption was that you always slake your lime first, meaning you calm the quicklime down with water well ahead of time, let it turn into a gentle putty, and only then mix it into your mortar or concrete. That's the safe, slow, modern way. And it makes a fine, gentle material. But it does not make the self-healing lumps. What the Roman builders did, and what the study confirmed, is that they mixed the dry quicklime directly in with their sand and their volcanic ash, and then added the water at the mixing stage, all at once, hot. That hot reaction did two things. It drove the chemistry faster, forming tough compounds, and it left behind those brittle little lime-rich clasts, those white first aid lumps, scattered all through the material, ready to dissolve and reseal any future crack. The thing everyone thought was a flaw was the whole point, and it only forms when you mix hot instead of cold. Now let me be plain with you, because quicklime is powerful stuff, and I won't pretend otherwise. When quicklime meets water, it gets genuinely hot and it can burn skin and eyes. So you wear gloves, you wear eye protection, you add water carefully and stand back from the steam. Treat it with the same respect the old builders did. Handled right, It is completely manageable, the way our great-grandparents handled it routinely. For a small home project, a garden stepping stone, a repair patch, a little decorative footing, here's the approach. You take your natural pozzolan, and you don't need to import volcanic ash from Italy to get it. This is the part I love. There are natural pozzolans all around us. Fine wood ash from a clean hardwood fire has pozzolanic properties. So does crushed, fired clay brick, ground into a red powder, which builders have used for thousands of years, called brick dust. In many regions, certain volcanic ashes and even some fly ash carry the same reactive quality. The Romans used what their land gave them, and so can you, with what's near you. You mix that pozzolan with your quicklime and clean sand and some small stone or rubble for body. A rough traditional ratio is about 1 part lime to 2 or 3 parts sand and pozzolan combined, plus your aggregate. You add the water at mixing, let it react, work it into your form quickly while it's active, and then, just like the mortar, you let it cure slowly and stay damp for days and even weeks. The longer and slower it cures, the harder and more stone-like it becomes, and unlike the brittle bag from the store, it keeps gaining strength for years instead of starting to fail. What you end up with is not a factory product. It's the oldest engineered building material on Earth, made by your own hands, breathable, forgiving, and able to seal its own small cracks with nothing but rainwater and time. The recipe was written down before the birth of Christ, ignored for 150 years, dismissed as sloppy work by modern experts, and finally, in our own time, decoded from those little white lumps and handed back to anyone willing to listen. That's the part that gets me. This knowledge was never truly lost. It was carried, silently, by the Pantheon standing in Rome, by the harbors still sitting in the sea, by a book on a shelf, by a handful of stubborn masons who kept mixing lime the old way while the world laughed at them for being behind the times. They preserved it, and now it's yours. I think about the money I spent over the years buying the same bag, patching the same step, watching the same crack come back like clockwork, all because nobody ever told me there was a material that heals itself and lasts for centuries. Nobody told me because there was no profit in telling me. But somebody wrote it down 2,000 years ago, hoping someone would still be listening. And now you are. So here's what I really want you to take from this. You didn't just learn a concrete trick today. You got back something that was quietly taken from all of us. The simple idea that the things we build can be made to last, that older is not the same as worse, and that a lot of what we were sold as progress was really just a faster way to keep us paying. If you're the kind of person who has always felt deep down that the old ways worked better than anyone gives them credit for, then you already know why this matters. You're not behind the times. You're ahead of them, because you're willing to recover what the rest of the world threw away. Now I want to hear from you, and be specific, because I read these. Tell me this. Do you have an older brick or stone home? And did someone ever repoint it with hard modern cement? And did the brick start crumbling afterward? Or do you know an old barn, an old chimney, an old wall that was lime-washed and just refused to rot? Type it in the comments right now, and tell me what you've seen with your own eyes. This audience remembers things the internet forgot, and your story might be the exact thing another person needs to read. And if you want more of this, more of the methods that convenience culture buried because they only sell once, then come with me. Subscribe and stand with the people who are digging this knowledge back up, one forgotten formula at a time. Because next time, I'm going to show you the old way our grandparents kept food from spoiling for months without a refrigerator, and the one common mistake that ruins it, that almost everyone makes the very first time they try. It's simpler than you think, and it's been hiding in plain sight the whole time. Before you go, let me tell you what waits inside. This video showed why old concrete outlasts the new. Members pick up right where we stopped, with the full Roman mix. And you can ask me your own question, and I answer you myself. No robots. You won't be alone either. You'll belong in the Timeless Ways circle. Just point your phone's camera at the code on screen, and you can cancel anytime. Now that you know the secret to stronger cement, let me show you how to make your walls look brand new again without ever fussing with plaster. That next video is right here, starting for you now.